Buongiorno a tutti, abbiamo avuto qualche problema tecnico di collegamento e mi scuso per il ritardo che abbiamo accumulato. Ecco, cercheremo di recuperare il tempo perduto velocemente. Buongiorno a tutti e
The
grazie
delay
per essere collegati, ripeto,
during
in
this
ritardo.
event. Thank you very much for being here with us today, and I would like to thank the fair for giving us the opportunity to share with you my views on a sector such as the organic sector,
stiamo lavorando già da tempo.
on which we've been dealing for a while.
Innanzitutto mi presento, sono Legale Santosuosso.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Giovanni Santosuosso. I am managing partner of Santosuosso Studio, and we are in charge of the legislative aspects of the organic sector. And of course, we are knowledgeable about legislation. Let me give you an overview of today's webinar. We wanted this webinar to last 1 hour and a half, but we will probably have to shorten it. We will talk about practical issues and not technical or legislative issues. We will try to use, so to say, company-friendly language so that also non-lawyers could understand what we talk about. We will talk about, I will give the floor to my colleague to talk about the food and beverage sector. Then I will take back the floor to give you an overview on market figures, figures that companies know perfectly well, even better than us, but we will just share with you some data on the last months, and then I will give you an analysis, a practical analysis on the legislation in the organic sector. I will then throw some conclusions, and of course I will put aside a bit of time for question and answers in the hope that technology will support us and that we will be able to take your questions. We don't like to just speak on our own and to give you monologues. We'd like to have questions from you. So we look forward to hearing your questions after our initial presentation. Let me give you a brief example of a brief description of what we do. My studio deals with law on the food and beverage sector. Our partners are the legal departments of specific companies, or we also work with the HR departments of different companies. We have different headquarters in different cities of Milan, Verona and Milan, and then Treviso and Rome. Some aspects we deal with are, for example, how companies can reduce costs, how can they streamline their processes, and so on. We managed to gain a lot of experience in the past few years, in the past 50 years actually, so we sort of created an observatory on how the industry is performing, and that's just thanks to our relations with different companies. This insight has helped us sharing gaining a lot of knowledge that we can now share with a lot of stakeholders in the industry.
Esperienze e condividerle insieme sotto il profilo della opportunità di business.
Of course,
la lettura della normativa non sarà una
we,
lettura
so to say, use this knowledge, we use our knowledge on
del business di impresa.
Legislative matters in this field to give companies some operational indications on how to proceed. Let me give you some figures on the organic sector, and I'm pretty sure this is not going to sound new to you. Consumption all over the world is around 95 billion euros. Half of them, half of this consumption is carried out in the United States, and around 38 billion of euros on the European market, 11 billion euros in Germany, 9 billion euros in France, and around 3.3 billion euros in consumption in Italy, in the Italian market. 8.1 billion euros is the consumption share of China. I am not an expert, a technician, but this figure here, the figure of the Chinese market, is a clear indicator that the Chinese market is far bigger compared to the Italian one. And so this could be a market opportunity, even if the Chinese market is quite complicated. Let's have a look at the consumption in Italy. In Italy, as I said, the consumption was around 3.3 billion euros. It increased by around 4.4% compared to the previous year. And in these figures, the HoReCa sector, school canteens and experts are not included. Another figure that I consider relevant as a non-expert is that in 2020, around 90% of Italian consumers, bought organic products more than 3 times. Another interesting figure is that the share of organic products in the agro-food sector is about 4%. It's a 4% cut. And in particular, fruit and vegetables are the most widespread articles bought. In 2019-2020, the value of the sales increased by 4.4% for the supermarkets. The increase was by 5.7%, and in traditional shops, the increase was by 3.2%. If we had more time, I wanted to give you more details on that, but I will just summarize the situation saying that this market is extremely interesting, and that if companies are considering the idea of entering this market, of course they should, because it's, as I said, an extremely interesting market. The organic sector is a sector that is becoming more and more interesting to companies, even if it can have a legal and jurisdictional framework that could seem quite complex. I would now like to give the floor to my colleague Christian. My colleague is going to give you an overview of around 30 minutes on the legal framework. And then I was, he's going to talk for about half an hour, and I will probably ask questions during this half hour. Let me give the floor now to Christian now for 30 minutes, and then I will draw my conclusions for around 30 minutes. Good morning. My name is Christian Cerutti. I'm a lawyer, and together with my colleague, Dr. Santosuosso, I am in charge of the food and beverage sector. After listening to a general presentation on the organic industry, I would like to say that it is no longer a niche market. It's no longer sold, organic products are no longer sold only in specialized shops, but it's very easy to find now in big supermarkets. Consumers are more and more interested in protecting the environment, in animal welfare. Consumers want to eat healthy food. And also, legislators have tried to regulate this complex market. Regulation on the field is becoming more and more complex, and it needs a very systematic analysis and approach. So if we take into account the legislative framework, the main components of this framework are different directives, European directives, and then some ministerials and national decrees and laws. The basic legislative act is the 834/2007 regulation that is going to be repealed by Regulation 889/2009. Regulation 848/2018. And these two regulations define the operational guidelines. Then we have other regulations, for example, the 1235 on the import, the 392 on the application measure and control system, the 184/2016 on other application modes, and then, as I said, there is going to be a new regulation, the 848/2018, which is going to repeal the old one. But the entry into force of the new regulation has been postponed to the 1st January 2022 because, of course, the whole of European Union and also the organic sector have been completely scattered by this COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, all the secondary legislation acts have been postponed because legislators now are more focused on other aspects such as protecting commercial and trade flows. Let's now understand why organic products are so special. Why? Because it's based on some goals and principles defined by Regulation 843/2007, which is to get healthy and high-quality products that respect natural cycles, seasonality, and that favor crop rotation, that protect and respect the balance between nature and biodiversity, that respect animal welfare, such as choosing the right races and the right species and taking care of the animals, protecting land fertility and the balance between the natural environment, the lack of use of GMOs and ionizing radiation, and of course the use of renewable resources. Of course, some chemicals are completely banned from the organic production. Another important important
della normativa è
aspect
la separazione tra gli spazi di
is the
produzione.
separation
Tra
between
prodotti biologici e non
production
biologici,
areas,
separazione che deve essere sempre
between
documentata e
organic and
documentabile.
non-organic
Quali
components.
sono? Adesso andiamo a
Separation and the production
occuparci della fase di trasformazione,
that
cioè
has
si
to be
compra materie
very
prime
clearly
biologiche
indicated.
per poterle poi combinare insieme e creare un prodotto finito nuovo. Qui il legislatore dice che bisogna impiegare prevalentemente prodotti di origine agricola, impiegare nella produzione solo ingredienti biologici, con alcune eccezioni solo se questi non sono disponibili sul mercato e ci sono delle procedure particolari che possono consentire di utilizzarli. Bisogna inoltre limitare l'impiego degli additivi e gli ingredienti non biologici solo alle strette necessità tecnologico-nutrizionali particolari. No sostanze e metodi di trasformazione che possono trarre in inganno in merito alla vera natura del prodotto. Assoluto divieto sempre degli organismi geneticamente modificati. Come dicevo prima, anche qui separazione temporale e spaziale tra prodotti bio e non bio. Divieto di coesistenza nel medesimo prodotto di ingredienti biologici e non biologici, e preferire appunto metodi di trasformazione che siano il più naturali possibili, quindi come metodi meccanici e fisici. Andiamo a capire adesso, quando io nell'etichettatura o nei documenti commerciali che accompagnano i prodotti posso utilizzare il termine biologico, cioè quando io posso qualificare come biologico un prodotto. Qui ci sono 3 possibili usi del termine. Sono l'articolo 23 del regolamento del 2007 che abbiamo appena visto e l'articolo 19 che ci danno un po' le linee guida. Vado subito al punto, che è quello di dire che possiamo utilizzarlo nella denominazione di vendita, cioè ad esempio possiamo chiamare un pacchetto di biscotti o un pacchetto di crackers biologico se quel prodotto contiene almeno il 50% degli ingredienti di origine agricola, escluso l'acqua e i sali aggiunti, e almeno il 95% di questi ingredienti di origine agricola sul peso totale del prodotto è certificato bio. Se ricorrono queste caratteristiche, allora io posso etichettare il mio prodotto come biologico. Vi è una seconda possibilità, quello che invece il biologico sia indicato solo nella lista ingredienti, come ingredienti se il peso è inferiore al 95% che abbiamo appena visto. Allora in questo caso io dovrò indicare gli ingredienti come biologici in proporzione al totale degli ingredienti di origine agricola. L'ultimo caso è qualora invece il prodotto figuri come ingrediente nel campo, può figurare come sia nel campo di denominazione di vendita sia nel campo ingredienti se il prodotto principale è un prodotto della caccia e della pesca, gli altri ingredienti di origine agricola sono biologici. Qui l'esempio tipico, ad esempio, può essere il tonno all'olio di extravergine d'oliva biologico, dove il tonno appunto è il prodotto della pesca e l'olio di extravergine di oliva è il prodotto certificato biologico. Ricordo che, come dice la normativa dell'etichettatura in generale, è vietato qualsiasi pratica ingannevole e qualsiasi evocazione del biologico non consentita. E inoltre anche tutti questi riferimenti alle indicazioni delle percentuali degli ingredienti bio devono comparire con colori, dimensioni e tipi di carattere identici alle indicazioni del resto degli ingredienti, in modo che il consumatore, vedendo un'etichetta, possa avere chiara evidenza di quello che sta consumando. Vediamo adesso quali sono un po' gli elementi che compongono
What
l'etichettatura del
are
biologico,
the
quali sono gli
elements
elementi più
in the
importanti.
organic labeling?
Inizialmente
What
il
are the most
riferimento al prezzo
important
di
elements?
produzione, che deve
First,
essere evidente che il
reference
prodotto è
to
biologico, deve
function.
essere
It must
scritto.
be
E
evident and
poi ci
well
sono due
written
stringhe
that the product
alfanumeriche
is
che abbiamo
organic.
sicuramente
Then we are
tutti
going
avuto
to
modo di
have
vedere, che sono i codici di
alphanumeric
etichettatura
strings that
attribuiti
are the
probabilmente dal controller
ID
o quello
code
specificato
of the
all'operatore che ha
control
effettuato la
body,
preparazione o la produzione
which
più
the
recente, concetto di
processor,
ultima
the last
trasformazione, e il
processor is
codice
subject to,
identificativo
and
dell'operatore
the ID
controllato.
code of the
Diciamo che
controlled
le stringhe
operator.
alfanumeriche che vediamo di
Let's
solito
say that
sono
these
organismo di
strings are
controllo autorizzato
usually
dal
the
Ministero delle Politiche
control
Agricole Alimentari e
body
Forestali, sigle
authorized by
IT,
the
il metodo di
ministry.
produzione
It's
bio e il
IT,
numero
then
assegnato proprio dal
bio is the
Ministero,
production
e la
method,
dicitura
and the
operatore
number assigned
controllato
by the
numero che
ministry,
invece è
and
assegnata
the
dall'organismo
wording
di controllo.
controlled operator
Un'altra
number, which
cosa
is
che abbiamo
assigned by the
sicuramente tutti
specific
avuto modo di
control
vedere è il
body.
logo
One
comunitario, che è
more thing
questa
is the EU
fogliolina
logo, which
bianca
is the
stilizzata con
white
12
stylized
stelle su
leaf
sfondo verde
with
chiaro,
12
che può essere
stars on
utilizzato
a
anche in bianco
light
e nero qualora
green
ci trovassimo di fronte a
background. It
un'etichetta
can be also be
monochromatica,
used
che
in
può essere
black and
utilizzata
white
solo
if
per i prodotti
required,
che hanno almeno il
which can be
95%
used
degli
only for
ingredienti di
products that
origine
have
agricola.
minimum
Non solo può essere
95% of
utilizzata, ma è
farming
anche
products within.
obbligatoria.
It is not only optional, it's compulsory. In addition to that, you must also report the place where the raw materials are sourced from. Here are 4 modalities to do that. EU EU indication if they come from EU, or third party if from outside the EU, or mixed. This is, however, quite an evanescent indication, so if possible, it would be possible to directly indicate the country of origin. But here, for instance, if we say Italy, all raw materials need to be sourced in Italy. All indications in the labels need to be readable and not possible to cancel, as the regulation of 2011 provides for as regards food labeling. Let's now see the main obligations for whoever produces and processes organic foods. Some of them are horizontal, I would say. They are quite typical of all organic foods and of all companies. Others are vertical and quite typical of the organic production. Those typical of organic production are identifying the own production and the authority, once identified, submit to controls as provided for by the regulations and obtain a justification patent, let's call it like this, which is a certification I can use with both national authorities and providers, because this means I am an organically certified company. So this is very positive in case of regular checks to monitor if we keep on abiding by the organic principles. Very quickly, these are additional obligations more related to the administrative side, so space and time separation between organic and non-organic foods, traceability of products, description of the production site activities, bookkeeping and trading, obligation to immediately inform the authorities about any complaints by consumers, the need to report all the results from any monitorings, and of course the obligations for traceability, HCCP, and recall of all risky products. Let's see what actually organic manufacturers need to abide by. Well, good news. If you only deal with distribution, you have a very important exemption, which is you only have to submit to the monitoring system, which is included in the regulations. If you have direct sales with direct presence of both operator and employees, you are not obliged to undergo the monitoring, but there are specific cases in here, because if you make direct selling, you must not manufacture the products. Products must be stored at the store. They must not be imported from third parties, and the activity must not be subcontracted. In any case, there are obligations to guarantee product safety, like the separation of processing sites and distribution sites, and the classical traceability obligations as regards also, for instance, the recall of risky products. What are the responsibility and the sections, and who's responsible about any misleading information on the labeling of foods? There's a more substantial and a more formal question in here. At substantial level, with reference to the labeling regulation article 8, the food operator in charge of the product is the name or company name or brand under which the product is commercialized, is traded. So this party that the law wanted to identify is responsible for the information on the food that guarantees that information is correct. But also the other stakeholders in the chain must not be fully uninterested in the labeling of their products because they also have a formal monitoring obligation. The legislator considers them as professionals and they cannot sell any food which they presume, as to their knowledge, that they are not compliant with the law. So we always suggest to have a self-monitoring system in place to avoid this problem. Let's quickly go on to the sanctions in the regulations on organic products that were implemented in 2017. Well, punishment here hits with a number of both inhibitory and financial measures. Inhibitory measures include recalling a lot of goods for a period of time to suspension of the justification document. The financial measure can vary from 1,000 for the most trivial cases to 30,000 euro. There is the prohibition to indicate any symbols or names that can actually mislead on the origin of the product, obligation to use the EU marking correctly, and so on and so forth. This also includes misleading information, misleading communication, and all these are sanctions can be inflicted onto the operator with a criminal reservation clause. This means that first the authorities must acknowledge if this is not a criminal case, because in this case punishment is inflicted on misleading products. In this case, we have again several sanctions, and these range from simple non-compliance to total fraud. Control bodies were also submitted to sanctions because they have obligation to impartiality, no conflict of interest, and autonomy, and they are sanctioned in case of any non-compliances. On this, please remember that control bodies must not have any commercial relationships or advisory relationships with the controlled entities to abide by the impartiality paradigm we mentioned before. Now, an overview on Regulation 848 of 2018 that is going to be implemented on January the 1st, 2022, to see the main novelties and some indications, even though a whole part of details is to be issued for better specifications. Article 36 introduces the possibility to have a group certification that allows manufacturers to obtain an organic production group certificate to cut on costs. Hence, common characteristics are required, like geography, for instance, and same products within defined budget limits. But there are also disadvantages because this certification has a common faith. In fact, if one member in the group is non-compliant, all the other members are believed to be non-compliant. The document is going to be called a certificate, and it's going to be issued by a specific body for defined validity periods, and it will allow the operators to distribute, produce, import, export, and process some specific products. And there are 7 categories of products. There's an additional provision in Article 11 saying that the organic product can be implicitly considered as missing any GMOs. This is very important from the probatory point of view. If any problems were detected, a specific procedure is included in Article 25 for the use or non-organic products in organic products. So if an organic product is missing, operators can become an active part and ask through the member states to the Commission to use a non-organic product when there is no availability of the corresponding organic product on the market, and hence the Commission can authorize this for a maximum 6 months. In addition, I want to stress that there's great focus and attention between the distinction not only between organic and non-organic foods, but also between processed and non-processed foods. This is particularly important for companies that have just started organic production because maybe they have not experienced the whole period of time which is required to be labeled as such. Again, what are the obligations for operators to avoid contaminations with non-authorized substances? Here are some recommendations that are very detailed from the administrative point of view. Check that storing takes place in separate phases in space and time. Record all operations completed and quantities processed. Identify lots. Operate on organic products only after the production setting is cleaned. Use only legally authorized products and check that labeling is perfectly fit also during transportation. There are also some behaviors that need to be kept by the operators if a non-compliant product is found, that is separating the non-compliant product from the compliant ones. Check if the suspect can be proved. Do not trade the product if you cannot guarantee conformity, and there are obligations for collaboration with the control bodies, that is, inform the control body if the suspect cannot be eliminated, and work with the control body to check the reasons for presence of any non-authorized materials.
Okay, let's now have a look at what the obligations are for organic producers. First of all, checking the packaging and making sure that labels contain the important indication. For example, the names of the producers, the name of the product, the code name of the control authority that is in charge of the operator, and then the lot number. Talking about imported products have to be accompanied by a certification, a control certificate made by control authorities. And there are two different scenarios: those who have an equivalence and those who don't. In the first case, the European Commission has made sure that the control organization, the controls made in the third country, are equivalent to those carried out in Europe. Therefore, the product can be sold directly into the market. If they're not compliant and if they're not equivalent, they have to undergo other controls. Unfortunately, the second lawyer cannot be interpreted because the audio quality is too poor. He's too far away from the microphone.
Devono valutare che il prodotto venga accompagnato da questo certificato rilasciato dagli organismi di controllo, una sorta di certificato di qualità.
All imported products need to be accompanied by a quality certificate.
E deve essere anche conservato nel tempo.
And this certificate needs to be stored in time.
Rispetto a quello che hai detto, c'è qualche indicazione pratica che possiamo dare?
Are there any concrete indications we can give to our listeners? Well, first of all, in applying all the internal verification tools in order to be sure that all imported products have this equivalent certificate with them. All stakeholders are responsible for the characteristics of the product.
Certo. Volevo adesso da ultimo occuparmi di due questioni pratiche, una sull'etichettatura e una invece giurisprudenziale. Per capire, ad esempio, se...
Okay, I would like now to talk about some practical cases.
perché come abbiamo visto prima chi fa mera distribuzione è esentato. Il caso proviene da un'azienda tedesca che vendeva online delle spezie
Let's now talk
biologiche
about a case of a
oltre a
German
vendere
company
dei
that
prodotti per
used
il
to sell
barbecue,
online some
riteneva appunto di
organic
non essere
spices together
di dover
with
essere assoggettata
some
al sistema di controllo perché
barbecue
a suo
tools.
modo faceva vendita
This
diretta,
company thought
benché
that she
online,
was
senza
not,
intermediazioni
she didn't
esterne.
have to
Però in questo
comply with
caso è
these control
intervenuta la
measures
Corte di Giustizia
because
dell'Unione
she
Europea con la sentenza
sold
279
products
del
directly to
2016
consumers, to final consumers,
che
without
nel
the
2016 poi
intermediation
pubblicata
of
nel
third
giudice delle
parties,
10 del
even if
2017, che ha detto che praticamente
these
siccome online ci
sales were
sono
carried out
maggiori
online.
rischi,
Then
l'esenzione
the
di cui
European
sopra va
Court of Justice,
interpretata in
with its
modo restrittivo e quindi
sentence, with its
assolutamente
ruling,
chi vende
sorry,
online attraverso piattaforme online non ha alcun tipo di
289/16 in
esenzione, quindi
2016,
deve
says
sia
that
notificare la propria
online
attività, sia soggettarsi al sistema di controllo, sia
sellers
ottenere la
actually
certificazione.
have to protect the consumer and can sell products only if their products are accompanied by this certificate.
Sì, diciamo che è un pacchetto completo quello che deve, è un pacchetto completo quello che deve
They are
in qualche
selling,
modo
actually,
essere
sellers
abboccato a chi
have
vende
to
prodotti online, perché
provide
non c'è nessuna
a
esenzione. Come ho detto
comprehensive
prima, gli unici
package,
che
even
possono
if they
essere
are dealing only
esentati
with online
dalla
products.
notifica e
The
dal
only ones
soggettamento al
that
sistema
can
di
be
controllo sono
exempt
quelli che fanno vendita
from
diretta,
these
quindi con
notification to the control
presenza
system are those
dell'operatore e
who
del
carry out direct
consumatore o
sales.
dell'holding dei
So the
salvavita.
operators and the consumers are at the same place at the same
Sì.
time.
Tutti gli
If
obblighi
you are
previsti prima.
selling organic products online, you have to comply with the regulations I just mentioned.
Certo. Vediamo da ultimo un esempio pratico di etichettatura di un prodotto
Let's now have a
biologico,
look
come abbiamo visto prima,
another
riporta
practical
appunto nella
example.
denominazione di
It's an
vendita proprio
example
il nome
of
prodotto, quindi un prodotto di cui può
the
essere tracciato
label
che il
of some
95% degli ingredienti
organic
agricoli
crackers.
biologici
It
hanno
says
provenienza biologica,
it's
infatti vedo
it's
nell'elenco degli
a label
ingredienti che
for
sono
products
tutti
that are
stati
made
contrassegnati con
of
l'asterisco,
organic ingredients,
quindi attesta appunto che sono biologici. Inoltre
are
vedo
made up
anche
to 94%
le
by
strisce alfanumeriche che abbiamo
organic
visto prima,
ingredients.
ovvero
I can see
organismo di controllo autorizzato dal Ministero
the
delle Politiche
code
Agricole,
of
Alimentari e
the
Forestali, la sigla è
control
P,
organization
bio, la
authorized by
provenienza
the
la
Ministry of
sigla anche
Agriculture,
operatore controllato
with the
numero,
code
e la
starting with
provenienza delle materie, che in
IT
questo caso è
and etc.
provenienza tutta
etc.
dell'Unione
They
Europea,
can
quindi
find
agricoltura
the
UE, e il mio
provenance,
bel logo
the
comunitario sulla sinistra.
source of all these
Ecco,
raw
io
materials that in this case
avrei completato
come
la mia
from Europe,
presentazione e
and
passerei di nuovo la parola all'avvocato
I can
Santosuosso, che
find all
farà un
the
ulteriore focus sulla
codes
giurisprudenza
of
per
the
vedere dei
regulatory
casi
authorities
particolari sia
that
relativi al
are
biologico sia
responsible for
relativi
quality
ad altre
control
normative
of this
alimentari che
product.
possono essere
Okay,
messe in
I am
analogia
done
con il
now with
biologico.
my overview, and I am going to give the floor to my colleague
Ecco,
again.
riprendo la parola, quindi rispetto al punto in cui ci eravamo lasciati.
Good
Auspico
afternoon.
che
Hey,
il
here I am
collega, il
again.
quale
I hope
probabilmente
that
ha dovuto redigere una relazione un po' tecnica
my
e con
colleague
varie
was able to
elencazioni,
explain all
abbia dato
the issues at
evidenza,
stake. Of
almeno
course,
questo era il nostro
this
intendimento,
presentation was
di
a bit more
due
technical,
tipologie di
but I really
attività.
hope
Diciamo
that
coloro
you were
che si
able to
orientano verso
realize that there are two different
l'operatività in un
entities in
mercato in
this
qualità di
industry. First
produttori
of all, those
e coloro
who are
invece che
producers on
operano
the
nel mercato
market,
in
and
qualità
then
di
there are
distributori. Abbiamo visto
the
che gli
distributors.
obblighi e diciamo, le caratteristiche di
Obligations
complessità sono diverse.
are different for
Come
producers
anticipato
and
anche, vorremmo
distributors.
lasciare qualche minuto alle domande se ci sono, e intanto che così tutti possono fare anche una
But of
riflessione,
course,
possono
if you have
portare
any questions
dei
about
casi
it, we hope
specifici.
to
La mia
have the time to
finalità
answer
invece,
them
la mia
later.
seconda parte della relazione sarà quella
Now,
di dare
in my
evidenza
second
di che cosa è
in the second
successo
part of my
in questi
presentation,
anni
I would like
a
to give
livello
you an
di sicurezza,
overview
cioè i casi pratici
of practical examples, concrete examples of what happened after a breach in the regulations. And I want to make a difference between civil law and penal law and criminal law. Sorry. This is not a webinar for lawyers, so I'll try to be I'll try to be not very technical. But what are the consequences? First of all, the first consequence, which falls under a civil law breach, is the lack of quality of an organic product. The second is the sales of dangerous raw materials, and then the third example is the misuse of brands. Let's look at the first case. This ruling was made in 2019 by the Court of Ferrara, and it says that if a different product is sold compared to what's stated on the label, so for example, in this case, the product was the organic round tomato, then if the product sold is different, the lack of the organic quality component of the product means that the producer has to pay an amount to compensate for the lack of quality. The product didn't have the required organic quality, so the ruler, the judge actually ruled for the conclusion of the contract because there was a severe breach of contract terms.
Della diversa destinazione dei prodotti al mercato. Quindi il brevissimo commento a questa sentenza ci porta a concludere che
the conclusions after these ruling is that the two products, organic and non-organic, are very different, and the difference in quality, if not offered, needs to be compensated. Here we have another case, which is that which regards the following. So some dangerous raw materials were sold. In this case, for example, hot chili was sold, and this hot chili was actually dangerous. The Court of Milan, in this case too, said that the contract, the sale contract, was had been violated, and so the contract was concluded. This hot chili was considered dangerous, and the seller had to pay damages because this hot chili ended up in products that were actually sold on the market, and these caused a lot of damage. What's important here? The important thing is that those sellers, organic sellers and non-organic sellers, have to keep a positive behavior, and they need to verify the quality of the goods they sell with regular checks. This ruling by Milan's court says the following. First of all, that sellers, whenever they sell their products, need to have, as I said, a positive attitude. Sellers have to verify and to regularly check for the quality of the products they sell. This is a very important obligation for sellers. In this case, sellers have to use due diligence
di
Otherwise,
carattere civile.
they
Ma
can
attenzione, e questo è un
uh,
po'
or they
l'aspetto
may
forse di maggior
infringe the
rilevanza,
law and have to face
tale obbligo
consequences.
il giudice lo pone anche a
Said
carico del
obligation
compratore, cioè il compratore
actually,
rispetto al compratore di materia prima, e quindi una industria di trasformazione
or
o
actually, the lawyer says
diciamo
that, the
chi
judge says that
svolge attività di lavorazione del prodotto,
those who buy
anch'egli,
raw
dice il
materials to
tribunale,
process
è
them
tenuto a una verifica sulla qualità della merce,
have to
salvo
verify
che
and to check the
non vi sia
quality of the
stata
goods
data
of the
da
raw
parte del
materials they
venditore
buy.
scusate,
The only
espressa
exception is
garanzia
if the
in
seller
ordine alla
of raw
qualità della
materials
merce. Quindi
gave
da questo punto di
an
vista
explicit
questa
guarantee
sentenza,
on
anche
the
se in
quality of
maniera
the goods
molto
they are
veloce
buying.
e sintetica, ci consente di fare una riflessione sugli
This
obblighi.
ruling
L'obbligo del venditore
gives
sia in
us
materia prima
an
sia
idea
del
of what the
venditore a
obligations
soggetti
are,
terzi, e un
both
obbligo
the
che
obligations
impone,
of raw
come
material
dicevamo
sellers
prima,
and the
un controllo
obligations of raw
periodico o a sentire,
materials
ma
buyers.
anche
And
l'obbligo
these
del
obligations
compratore, che
are
poi si
regular
riporta
checks
evidenziale al
on the
venditore,
quality of
è
raw
una
materials,
condotta che deve essere
also
ispirata anche in
sampled
questo caso a controlli
if they want.
periodici o a campione, salvo che lo
And
stesso
also,
non
those who
ottenga da
buy raw
parte del
materials
soggetto
have to carry
cui
out
vende
regular checks on the
il
quality
bene, e
of the
non ottenga una
products
garanzia in
they
questo
buy.
senso da parte
Of
del
course,
soggetto
the only
venditore.
exception is, as I
Questo per
said, if
evitare di
they receive
incorrere in
an
questo caso in
explicit guarantee
responsabilità
on the
civile.
quality of the goods they're buying
Passiamo alla
from the
slide
seller.
successiva. Ecco, in questo caso cambiamo completamente lo scenario, siamo sempre in ambito civile, quindi siamo
We
sempre di
are
fronte a
totally
una causa di
changing the
natura civile tra due
scenario.
soggetti, tendenzialmente
We
venditore e
are
compratore. In questo
always
caso
having
invece
here a civil
riportiamo
case between two
il
parties.
caso dell'uso di un
Here,
marchio,
however, we
uso
are
che
reporting
i giudici hanno ritenuto essere
the case
effettuato in maniera impropria, quindi un marchio registrato, per la
of a
promozione di prodotti
judge
che non erano
that had
prodotti tipici.
to
Qui è una Cassazione
actually assess the
delle
situation of a
Nove,
registered
la quale
trademark
ha affermato
where
che in
products
caso di
were
un
not
soggetto che aveva
organic. This
registrato un
is a Court
marchio,
of
qui lo
Cassation
citiamo
ruling in
perché evidentemente
2009.
è
They said that the party who
proprio in
had
questo il
registered
punto
a
fondamentale
brand,
del problema,
of course, we are
marchio che era
mentioning it
bio-ene
here because this is
per
the
prodotti a
very point
carattere
of the problem.
vegetale, da
The
utilizzare
brand
in
was
modalità tali,
Bio-Ene
diciamo i giudici, da indurre
for
l'errore consumatore,
vegetal
essendo
products,
invece
and they
questi prodotti
used
provenienti da
it,
agricoltura
according to the
convenzionale.
judges, to mislead
Quindi
the consumers
siamo di fronte a
since
un
these
caso
products
di
came from
marchio
conventional
registrato
farming.
per prodotti,
So
come
the
dicevamo,
case
provenienti da
here
agricoltura tradizionale, che però
is of a
venivano,
registered brand
diciamo, marchio che veniva
for
utilizzato
products from
evocando, non in
conventional
maniera
farming
diretta, ma in
that
maniera indiretta,
the brand, however, was
non
used
solo l'origine
to
vegetale,
evoke
ma evidentemente la
indirectly
parola bio. Ebbene, i giudici
not
hanno detto che
only the
la parola
vegetal
bio configura
but
un
also the
carattere
organic origin of
ingannevole
the same
e che
product.
non
The judge
poteva,
said
la
that the
parola
word
bio,
organic,
qualificare
bio,
prodotti
is misleading
semplicemente
here,
vegetariani, come
and the
aveva
word
evidentemente
organic
affermato il ricorrente.
could not be
Per cui anche in questo
applied to
caso
simply
nell'utilizzo
vegetarian
del
products
marchio,
as
benché
instead the
registrato,
party
in
had
questo caso
done. So here
il
again,
soggetto
when
titolare del
using
marchio
the
si era
brand,
difeso
even though it
appunto
was a
dicendo: ma io
registered
faccio
brand,
riferimento
the
a prodotti a
party
carattere
owning the
vegetale, anche
brand
se
had defended
derivati da agricoltura
themselves,
convenzionale.
saying that
Ma in
they
questo
were
caso i giudici
referring to
hanno ritenuto che questa
vegetable
evocazione, questa parola
products,
bioene,
even though they
non
come from
fosse
conventional
conforme al
farming. But
dettato normativo, per cui
judges
lo hanno
actually
sanzionato
believed
molto
that
severamente.
the evocation bio-ene was not in line
Diciamo
with the
fattispecie
regulations, and so they
diverse,
sanctioned
ma
him.
che comunque ci consentono di fare
Let's
una
now
valutazione,
talk
una
about
visione
different
su come
cases that, however,
incardinare le aule di
allow us
giustizia
to produce
il tema
an
è stato
assessment, an
affrontato, e quindi
overview on
crediamo
how
di
the
fare utile
issue
aver
was
portato
tackled in
proprio dei
court.
casi pratici. Qui mi sembra
So
che
we
siamo
believe this
partiti
is
dal
quite
caso un po'
useful since
base,
these are
quindi
all
la vendita
practical
di
cases.
uova
I believe that
come
here
biologiche,
we have
ovviamente
started
prive
from a
delle
very basic
caratteristiche
case, so selling
questa sembrerà
eggs
banale, ma
considered as organic but that had no characteristics of an organic product. This could be quite trivial. This is a Court of Cassation ruling of 2007. They stated that there's a commercial fraud if eggs are sold under an organic egg labeling if they come from breedings that do not use organic breeding principles. Clearly, this is a fraud, a crime. It is sanctioned by the criminal code. Within short, we are going to see the difference compared to other types of cases. However, in this case here, the fact that the labeling wrote the organic egg wording without the product being such, it actually entailed the application of the criminal sanction. A very similar ruling came a few years thereafter, again by the Court of Cassation in 2013. Again, here the case was about organic oranges without the regulatory characteristics required to use the organic labeling. Here again, the Court of Cassation stated that there's a commercial fraud if oranges are sold under an organic production labeling if this is not really the case. As regards this, without getting into too many technical details, what we wanted to stress was the irrelevance of the profit or damage, because the party in the trial had defended by stating that, as a matter of fact, even though oranges from conventional farming had been delivered, the goods were delivered at production cost, and as a matter of fact, compared to the conventional farming oranges, they had a higher nutritional value. Those presumably organic oranges had a higher nutritional value. Again, here, judges believed that the circumstances were not relevant, of course, to protect the indications, and hence they stated the case of a commercial fraud. So that was an declination compared to the easier egg case. So, independently upon the use or not of some tricks like selling at production cost, but if you use the word organic in your sale and the product is not organic, you run the risk of a commercial fraud like in this case. As I was saying, a similar case to commercial fraud, however more articulated, however, which is quite useful to produce an assessment of the possible breaches, comes from counterfeiting of geographical indications or denominations of origin. This is a quite new Court of Cassation ruling, 2016. It's a different type of crime. I don't want to get into too many technical details. We are just trying to provide a general reflection as regards our daily life operation. We have mentioned a different article in the code. Here, some misleading, untrue indications were given on the product, and the judges believed they were misleading, since the regulation was aimed at protecting the interest of owner producers, of course those owning the geographical indication and denomination of origin labels. So here, unlike the commercial fraud where there's a fraud, a trick, for the
nell'utilizzo
crime
delle
to
indicazioni
exist,
geografiche
then
di
there's a
indicazione di
need to
origine non
mislead
veritiere, evidentemente
the
non
consumer
c'è
in
necessità
using
che questi
geographical
integrino
indication or
il
denomination
reato di
of
ingannare il pubblico, è
origin which are
sufficiente solo che venga
untrue.
ammesso.
There is no
Quindi nel caso in
need
cui vengano
to
indicate sul
mislead the
prodotto
public, the
indicazioni
audience. You just need
geografiche
to
o
put them.
denominazioni di origine,
So,
anche se
if the
queste non sono idonee a
product
ingannare il pubblico,
carries
comunque valgono,
a
comunque sono
geographical
sufficienti
indication or a
per ricreare
denomination of
il
origin,
reato di
even
cui
though they do not
siamo
mislead
accusati. E
consumers.
quindi
However,
qui è
this
più
is
delicata e
enough
più,
to envisage the
diciamo,
crime in
estesa
question.
la
So
tutela
here,
su questo tipo
the
di
question
norma
is
tende a salvaguardare
thornier and
evidentemente
the protection
l'interesse dei
is more
produttori
extended
del
because this
territorio
type
geografico.
of
Quindi in questo
regulation
caso
tends
l'utilizzo
to
di denominazioni o di
protect
indicazioni
the interests of
viene
producers.
rigorosamente
So
sanzionato.
here, the use of denominations or of
Un'altra
geographical
casistica che
indications
credo possa
is
interessare
sanctioned.
sempre a livello valutativo riguarda il mancato
Another
rispetto della
case,
disciplina.
another
E
interesting
qui
case
lo richiamo,
for
l'abbiamo
assessment
richiamato,
purposes
abbiamo
regards
indicato
the
questa
failed
sentenza
compliance
per la
with the
possibile
regulations.
analogia sui prodotti bio, dove
We have
benché non si
given
tratti evidentemente di un
outlined
disciplinare
this
similarmente
ruling
alle
here
indicazioni
because it is
geografiche,
quite
ma in
similar
questo
to the
caso si
point with
potrebbe
organic
valutare una
products,
possibile
similarly
analogia.
to
Ebbene, una sentenza
geographical
dello scorso
indication.
anno, del
Here,
2019, sempre della Cassazione
there could
Penale, ha
be
affermato che
analogy.
c'è
Actually, the
contraffazione
ruling was
non
from
solo in
2019,
caso
again,
di
Court of
falsificazione di
Cassation,
marchio
Criminal Court of
dell'AGP o
Cassation.
dell'IGP, ma anche quando non è
Counterfeiting
rispettato il disciplinare
comes
di
not
produzione.
only when
Con
the
riferimento
brand,
a
the
cosa?
PDO or the
Quando non è
IGP
disciplinare,
is
rispettato,
counterfeited,
scusate, il
but
disciplinare di
also
produzione
with
con
reference
riferimento
to
alle materie
what?
prime, al
When
luogo di produzione, al
the
metodo di
production
ottenimento e alle
regulations are not
principali
complied
caratteristiche
with,
fisiche, chimiche,
or
microbiologiche e
there's a
organolettiche del
difference
prodotto.
in
Quindi
the
in
place
tutti
of
questi
origin
casi
or in the main
siamo di fronte a un reato di
organological,
contraffazione.
physical,
E questo credo
chemical,
che sia particolarmente
microbiological,
importante,
or
specialmente per
organoleptic
coloro
characteristics
che
of
si
the
vogliono
product. Here
difendere
are
da
all cases
contraffattori,
for
coloro che
counterfeiting.
vogliono evidentemente
This is pretty
dare
important for
evidenza
whoever
a
wants to
ipotesi
defend themselves from
di
the
reato,
counterfeiters.
e tenendo conto,
They
credo che questa
want
recentissima sentenza parla
to
e
act
dà la possibilità
considering,
di invocare la
as in
contraffazione,
this very
ripeto,
recent
non solo nel
ruling,
caso in cui venga falsificato, questo è il
that
caso più
provides the
palese, che
possibility
più
of
facile, quindi
invoking
il prodotto
counterfeiting not
evidentemente
only if there's a
non
true
rispetta
falsification, then
le
it's
caratteristiche
easier, of course.
richieste
So
dallo
the
stesso, quindi non
product does not
appartiene a quella categoria e viene
comply with the
dispacciato, viene
required characteristics.
individuato come tale, e
So it
questo
does not belong
cominciano a
to that
privare uova,
category and it
quant'altro
is
potrebbero
instead
essere dei casi più
sold as
semplici. Ma
such. So,
attenzione,
as we said about the eggs
quando non viene
before,
rispettato il
these could be
disciplinare, quindi
easiest
quando
cases.
manca una
However,
delle
attention,
caratteristiche alle quali fa riferimento il
when
disciplinare, e qui
this
sono
also
utilizzate
applies
materie prime,
to the
quindi vengono
case when the regulations,
utilizzate materie
production
prime
regulations, are
differenti.
not complied with.
Se viene
So,
svolta,
if
diciamo, una
different raw
produzione in un luogo
materials are
diverso,
used,
o se vengono
if
utilizzati dei metodi di
production is performed in a
ottenimento
different
con
place,
caratteristiche fisiche,
or
chimiche,
if
microbiologiche,
methods
organolettiche
are
diverse.
used
In tutti questi casi, evidentemente,
with physical,
ci si può
chemical,
tutelare da
microbiological, or
contraffattori. Questa
organoleptic
credo che sia una sentenza
characteristics of the products
piuttosto
that are
importante
different.
nel
In this
panorama
case, you can
così anche
protect
di
yourself from
tutela di ciò che
counterfeiters.
si fa,
I
e io
believe this is a
ritengo
quite
possa essere
important
invocata o comunque
ruling
valutata nel
within the
momento in cui
protection
dovessero essere
panorama,
fatte delle considerazioni
and
per
I
la
believe it
tutela
can be
anche
invoked or
non solo
actually
dei marchi
assessed
IGP o DOP, ma
whenever
anche di
considerations are
produttori.
made to protect not
Abbiamo
only the
dato
PDO or
un
IGP
quadro
brands, but more in
abbastanza
general. We have
sintetico, diciamo, di quelle
provided
che
a quite
sono le caratteristiche
general
delle
overview
interpretazioni
of
dei giudici, di quali sono
the
stati i casi, diciamo, trattati
characteristics
davanti ai
in
giudici
the
in questi anni. Come
interpretation
detto,
of
abbiamo
judges,
dato
what
evidenza degli
were the
aspetti
cases brought
della
to
giurisprudenza
court in
civile,
these
e
years.
quindi
We
la
have
possibilità di
stressed
risolvere un contratto
some
in caso di
aspects in civil legislation
venditore o di
and the possibility
compratore.
to terminate a
Abbiamo visto
contract
anche quali sono le possibili conseguenze di
if the seller
natura
or the buyer
penale
breaches
nell'ipotesi in
it,
cui
and we have also seen the
venga violata la
consequences
normativa
in
della quale
terms
prima il
of
collega
criminal
Cerutti ha
consequences in
dato
case
evidenza.
the regulations are breached, as my colleague Cerruti actually said. We are now heading towards the conclusions. I don't know if we have any questions. We have one. So I would head towards concluding by evidencing what we are doing at the moment, what projects we have underway, what we are doing at the moment for companies, and what are the most relevant items that the organic sector operators can assess to orient, I would say, not only in the regulatory field, as my colleague mentioned before. I understand that the given regulation in a webinar, in the speed we actually actuate is very complex, but we would like to go towards our conclusions, draw the conclusions by providing some strategic indications. And these are very easy indications, which we would like to share with you. First, due to the interpretation that judges provided of the situation, we believe it is required to have a contractual protection by companies when raw materials are bought or when products are bought for reselling later. I mean, our first recommendation for the people who operate in the organic sector or for whoever is assessing to penetrate that market, whether they are producers or distributors, I believe that the first suggestion would be to assess the sales and purchase agreements to get protected. We have seen the need for controls, we've seen the need to terminate a contract, we've seen the possibility to share a criminal responsibility. We believe that one of the first steps to perform on the issue is to get equipped with contracts, both upon purchasing the raw materials that will be processed and when the very same producers perform selling activities in the same way, even though clearly with a lower diligence and intensity for distributors too, so that also the large scale retail distribution should monitor and check the chain, and this is first done at contractual level.
Important aspect is checking for the correctness of labels. Labeling is a very important aspect to take into consideration. And be reminded that
possiamo discutere della diligenza richiesta in ordine alle caratteristiche intrinseche del prodotto.
If we can talk about due diligence connected to the intrinsic characteristics of the product, based on my experience, I have to tell you that labeling is one of the most sensitive points in relation to due diligence. It's one of the first things people can see. That means that the criminal and civil law profiles and responsibilities are higher for labels. If there are problems connected to the label, I suggest you to allocate the most resources to correct and solve those problems and those issues.
Il suggerimento da parte nostra è quello di verificare, di fare un assessment.
In particular, in terms of criminal and civil law, my suggestion is to carry out checks on the correctness of the label and to verify what are the criminal responsibilities for actions or actual for crimes committed in relation to the labels. You may incur in severe sanctions and severe consequences in case of non-compliance with labeling and material and raw material quality. In many cases, also in very structured and organized companies, we realized that there were actually issues connected to the point. There are two questions, so I have to wrap up so that we can have enough time to answer them. So, to conclude, in terms of criminal liabilities, companies have to carry out what would happen if violations are made. So, who's going to be liable for those violations? Make sure that there are no specific individuals, CEOs or other managers that are in charge of controls for specific areas. Because actually you have to make sure that they are, because otherwise if you don't have a dedicated person, the liability will be distributed to all the stakeholders in the production chain, from the point of sale, from the manager to the point of sale retailer, and so on and so forth. So liability will be more widespread. You have to indicate one person in charge of liability or in charge of supervision for those aspects that fall within criminal law and criminal responsibility, criminal liability, in case breaches occur. My suggestion is to organize or reorganize your proxies in order to minimize criminal responsibility for CEOs and managers. You can do that in 3 phases. First of all, with an assessment. What we do, we help you through 3 phases. First of all, an assessment, a general assessment. Then we highlight what the risks are based on the non-conformities, and finally, we suggest the measures you have to take in order to reach conformity through a so-called remediation plan. This is what we usually do when we carry out our conformity evaluation. So I'll stop now, and there is enough time for the questions. My colleague will answer to his question, then I will take my time, read them. You can ask and then answer them. You can write questions to me in the chat or through other channels.
rispetto alla mia esposizione, ricevuto una richiesta di precisazione da parte di
Here I
Sabrina
am because
relativo a un
Sabrina
argomento
asked me for
caratterizzato molto
some
interesse, che è quello
clarifications
degli obblighi di
on
esenzione
a
per chi
very
fa vendita
interesting topic,
diretta.
which are the
È stato chiesto appunto
exclusions
se questa
obligations
vendita
for
diretta può
direct
essere considerata
sales.
solo quella
She
di
asked me
dettaglio,
if
quindi non quella
direct sales
all'ingrosso.
are
E in
only
questo caso
retail
devo
sales or
dire che è proprio
also
così, perché
wholesale
come ho detto prima deve esserci
sales.
proprio un caso di vendita diretta, di vendita avvenga in presenza contemporaneamente del consumatore
For sale
finale
to be
e
considered
dell'operatore
direct
o del
sale,
soggetto
you have to
d'addebito.
have the
Ricordando
final
sempre che chi
consumer
fa
at the
distribuzione in
same time
questo
and place
caso deve
with
vendere
the
prodotti in
seller.
imballaggi preconfezionati, non deve essere né il produttore né il preparatore dei prodotti. I prodotti devono essere
The
immagazzinati esclusivamente
retailer
presso il punto
has to
vendita, non
sell
devono essere
packaged goods.
importati da
It
paesi
shouldn't
terzi
be
e l'attività non
the
deve essere
producer or
soprattutto e
the
sottofatto
distributor
a
of
terzi.
the
In questo
product,
caso opera
and
a
the
pieno
activity
d'esenzione.
should
Negli
not
altri
be
casi
carried out
purtroppo no.
by or
Lascio
on behalf of
adesso
third
nuovamente la parola
parties.
all'avvocato Santosuosso che
Only in
invece
this case
risponderà a un
there
quesito
are
che ha ricevuto sulla
exceptions.
sua esposizione.
Then my colleague
Eccoci.
Santosuosso, Mr.
Allora, la
Santosuosso, will
domanda
answer now
era
the
quella
questions
di
he
uso
received.
improprio di informazioni che evocano il bio.
The
Ma
question is
io anche in questo
the misuse of
caso
information pointing
direi
out to
che,
organic
dato
products.
non avendo evidenza di che cosa vogliano dire
So, first of all,
informazioni che
what
evocano
are
uso improprio di informazioni che
the
evocano il bio,
misuse
farò una
of
domanda
information
generica, ma la domanda generica noi lo abbiamo visto anche
evoking
sulle
organic products?
precedenti slide
That's
che
not
davano evidenza
clear.
della
I mean,
sentenza.
what these
Io
information
tenderei
are,
ad
it's
avere
not
un
clear.
approccio estremamente
So,
prudenziale e quindi
my suggestion
posta così
is
la
to
domanda
be
uso improprio di
cautious.
informazioni che evocano il bio,
Misuse of
mi farebbe
information talking
immediatamente
about organic
pensare
products
a una
makes
possibile
me think
violazione della normativa e
about
quindi un rischio
a
piuttosto
possible
elevato.
breach of the
Credo
regulation.
che
And so the risk is high in
almeno
this case.
nell'ambito di mi
I
chiedono
think
se può
that
essere configurata l'ipotesi di frode in commercio. Probabilmente
they're
ecco,
asking me if
riterrei che si possa
the crime here is commercial
configurare un'ipotesi di
fraud.
frode in commercio, ma
I think
ovviamente
that
per poter
yes,
rispondere
it
poi
could be a
in maniera
commercial
più
fraud.
impropria si dovrebbe vedere
But in order to give you a more
la
concrete
singola
answer,
fattispecie.
I'll have
Io credo,
to
ripeto,
look
che
at the
l'uso improprio ci porti
concrete
su una
case,
strada
concrete example.
estremamente scivolosa e pericolosa.
Misuse
Quindi
of
su una
organic
domanda così
indication, denomination,
generica tenderei
takes us
a
to a tricky
dare
slope,
evidenza della
a slippery
necessità
slope,
della
actually.
massima
So, my
attenzione
suggestion
perché
is
riterrei
for
si
you
possa
to be
configurare
very,
una
very
fattispecie
careful
penale.
when choosing
Ecco, io
how
credo
to use
che...
these indications, because
No,
otherwise the
rimani pure
risk
lì
is
che
very
così
high.
concludiamo. Rimani pure lì che poi
è proprio
concludiamo.
molto importante fare attenzione su tutto quello che viene indicato in etichetta.
Unfortunately, it's impossible
Quindi non solo
to
la domenica
hear the
marche, ma
second
anche
lawyer,
eventuali indicazioni
the
che
one who
possono
is not
sembrare in
on
qualche modo
screen. So
neutre,
it's
come ad esempio il
impossible
prodotto
to interpret
naturale,
it.
il prodotto ecosostenibile, che magari non hanno poi delle dirette discipline di riferimento che potrebbero evocare il bio. Pensiamo solo anche all'utilizzo, ad esempio, del colore verde, determinate immagini che possono evocare la natura, che potrebbero comunque essere considerate anche in base al regolamento generale sull'etichettatura come ingannevoli per il consumatore e anche andare proprio in violazione della normativa sul biologico, che invece vuole tutelare proprio tutti questi aspetti sulla natura.
Sì, noi come al solito, questa è una
Okay,
considerazione
well,
che faccio piuttosto spesso, se dovessimo guidare noi il
this is
marketing,
something I
evidentemente
always
poi non
say.
rischieremo di
If
non
we
far
were in
vendere più
charge of
neanche un prodotto né
marketing,
bio né non bio.
we
Noi ci
probably nothing
limitiamo,
would be
diciamo, a
sold.
considerazioni poi
Not organic, not
di stretto
non-organic products.
diritto.
I mean,
Evidentemente la
marketing is not
raccomandazione
our field.
finale è quella
What
di
we do
prestare la
is
massima attenzione non solo
we are
ai
lawyers,
casi
so we
di violazione più palese, ma anche a quelli che
our duty is to
indirettamente
tell you
possono,
to be
nel caso
careful
dell'uso
with
improprio,
what you
possono portare
do
evidentemente a
because
ritenere
with what to do with your marketing, because not only because the use of misleading information could end up in regulation infringement and severe consequences. So this is it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your patience, given that we arrived late. I would like to thank Beals for hosting us here. And of course, in case you have any questions, our email and our website are here. You can see them, so you can contact us anytime. So it's over, and I would like to wish you all a good evening. Thank you.